Some women, having lost their husbands and being left with children in their care, discover very questionable ways to stay afloat. This is exactly what Alex did when she was offered a substantial sum for a small favor. The mother simply dreamed of giving her sons a better life, but the outcome turned out to be sorrowful. Alex drove her boys to her parents and settled alone in front of her computer. Tomorrow would be a challenging day, after which she would either solve all her financial troubles or vanish forever. The woman wasn't entirely sure how everything would unfold, but her intuition suggested that this venture might prove dangerous. Alex had thought through possible outcomes beforehand, so she wrote a note to her son. She was confident that her boy would figure out how to proceed. This shocking incident occurred just a couple of years ago, in late 2021 in Hastings. This district is situated in East Sussex County in southeastern England. Alexandra Morgan, age 34, lived approximately 30-plus miles from East Sussex in a town called Cranbrook in Kent County, with a population just over 6,500 people. She was a single mother raising 2 sons. Alexandra, or Alex as her close ones called her, was a qualified dog groomer. She enjoyed her work. Unfortunately, it didn't provide the financial opportunities that were so essential for the woman. Caring for 2 young boys consumed much energy and time. Supporting the family and looking after the children rested entirely on the woman's shoulders. She had no one to rely on except herself. All week, Alex worked tirelessly, so on November 13th, 2021, she took her children to her parents' house for them to stay with their grandparents for a couple of days. The woman told her mother and father that she planned to go to a spa for the weekend, relax, and get some rest. The next day, November 14th, Alex left home, got into her car, and headed to the spa center. She promised her parents she would pick up the boys on November 17th. However, when November 17th arrived, Alex didn't show up at the family home or call her mother to inform that she would be delayed. The parents didn't raise alarm, deciding to wait until the next day when their daughter didn't appear on November 18th and gave no sign of herself. Alex's mom contacted the police and reported her daughter's disappearance. Friends, over 90% of viewers watch videos without subscribing to the channel. Check if you're subscribed. If not, please be so kind as to subscribe to the channel to support me. The investigation into Alexandra Morgan's disappearance began almost immediately. The police's first actions were to visit Alex's house in Cranbrook to find any possible clues about what might have happened to her. Naturally, the woman wasn't at home. The dwelling itself appeared quite ordinary, with no signs of struggle, forced entry, break-in, or anything similar. And consequently, no leads. All the police knew at that point from Alex's parents' statements was that the missing woman was planning to go to a spa center that weekend, located in York, several hours' drive from Kent, so police tried to track Alex's movements and her vehicle using surveillance cameras and automatic license plate recognition cameras. On the morning of November 14th, shortly after Alex left home, she was captured by surveillance camera at a gas station in Cranbrook, located nearby. Around 7:30 a.m., the woman stepped out of her white Mini Cooper, filled her car with gas, and exchanged a few words with the clerk, also telling him she was heading to a spa center in York. However, after leaving the gas station, Alex headed south, although York was north of Kent. For some reason, she drove in the opposite direction. Why did she lie about her spa trip? Where was this woman actually heading? To answer all these questions, police continued attempting to track Alexandra Morgan's movements that morning through road cameras. But the problem was that the woman seemed to choose back roads where cameras weren't as frequent. During the investigation, police examined Alex's phone records and, based on this, determined that her mobile phone had pinged towers in Hastings in East Sussex, after which it suddenly turned off. It appeared East Sussex was the last known location where Morgan had made contact. The reason why the woman concealed her final destination from everyone still remained unclear. Therefore, police began checking surveillance cameras in the Hastings area. They were looking for any footage where the white Mini Cooper might have been recorded. Eventually, police noticed how Alex's car approached a scrap metal yard in Hastings shortly before 8 a.m., which was located on a very quiet back road called Rock Lane. The woman waited for someone while sitting in her car for some time. Then another vehicle, a golden Jaguar, appeared in view of the same surveillance camera. It drove past Alex's Mini Cooper and turned toward agricultural lands, after which the woman's car followed the golden Jaguar. The person sitting behind the wheel of that vehicle might have had some information about Alexandra Morgan's disappearance and her current whereabouts. Police needed to determine who owned the car and where it was heading that morning. It turned out that near the scrap metal yard, there was a farm called Little Bridge in Hastings. Therefore, instead of the spa center in York, Alex, for some reason, went to this farm. On the evening of November 23rd, 5 days after Alex was declared missing, detectives set out. It took several days to review all video recordings and determine the woman's approximate location. Of course, during this time, she could have gone anywhere from the farm, but the police had at least some lead. Officers arrived at Little Bridge in the evening. They looked around, peeked into barns and sheds, tried calling Alex's name, but there were no signs of anyone's presence on the farm. Neither Alex, nor her Mini Cooper, nor the landowners were visible. After conducting an initial search of the agricultural grounds, police were about to leave empty-handed when a van appeared on the property. A man stepped out of the cabin. He introduced himself as Mark Brown. He appeared to be around 40 years old, and this person rented the Little Bridge farm. He himself lived with his wife and child in another area of Hastings and came to the farm to work. Mark Brown was a mechanic who repaired old cars and then sold them for a moderate price. The farm had a small workshop, and at the nearby scrapyard, necessary parts could sometimes be found. Just in case, police carefully examined Mark Brown's background and discovered he had no criminal record and had never had any problems with the law. The man seemed like an exemplary family man, but after talking with him, it turned out this wasn't quite true. Mark was the owner of the Golden Jaguar, the car that appeared in surveillance footage on the day Alexandra Morgan disappeared. When detectives began questioning Mark about the missing woman, he didn't deny that on the morning of November 14th, he had indeed met with Alex, and they both came to Little Bridge Farm. Mark was ready to answer all police questions. He admitted that he met Alex on a website called Adult Work, where escort workers could advertise their services and where potential clients could contact them. It turned out that Alex secretly worked in the intimate services industry. Her family and friends hadn't even suspected how the single mother earned her living. Mark Brown first contacted Alex back in June 2021, approximately 5 to 6 months before her disappearance, and they maintained contact throughout this time. On November 14th, the woman did indeed come to Little Bridge, as they had arranged beforehand, to spend several hours with Mark. Then she returned to her car and left the farm. According to Mark Brown, this was the last he saw of her. The woman was alive and well, and he had no idea what might have happened to her after she left his property. At first glance, the farm owner's story seemed truthful. However, soon, police obtained evidence that something didn't add up. As mentioned earlier, surveillance cameras located near the scrapyard had recorded Alex's car driving toward Little Bridge. But the footage showed no instance of her white Mini Cooper moving in the opposite direction that same day. It appeared that Mark Brown had lied to officers. Although Morgan was still not found, the farm owner was detained on suspicion of wrongdoing against the woman. On November 25, 2021, the man was taken to the police station for questioning. Detectives hoped that after arrest, Mark would confess what he had done with Alexandra, since there was no point in lying further. But to almost all questions, Mark responded with a short phrase, "No comment." Police failed to learn anything new from this person. In fact, Mark simply refused to talk about Alexandra. Consequently, detectives needed to figure out for themselves the circumstances of the woman's disappearance and what really connected her with Mark. The entire search was concentrated around Little Bridge Farm. The agricultural grounds covered an area of about 4 acres, where several buildings, sheds, and several transport containers were located. A forest stretched around this. There was also a small lake or pond on the property. So the police had quite many places that needed to be examined. The searches were hampered by the incredible clutter in all buildings. The sheds stored a huge amount of junk that detectives had to examine. They noticed a few items that stood out among the other clutter and garbage. These were weapons, a couple of pistols, and a shotgun. Police also found several rolls of electrical tape, duct tape, and cable ties. If Mark Brown was indeed involved in Alexandra Morgan's disappearance, all these items might have been used against her. But the strangest and most disturbing thing discovered at Little Bridge Farm was inside a transport container. There was something like a small room. An inflatable mattress lay in one corner, and in another was something like a kitchen, a microwave oven and toaster. It gave the impression that someone had lived there. In principle, the farm owner himself could have spent time there. But the strangest thing was that the locks on this container were on the outside. This really troubled the officers. They wondered if someone could have been a prisoner of this strange room. Could Mark Brown have illegally held Alexandra Morgan in the transport container? And where was the woman now? During the investigation, police also conducted a search of Mark's house. Complete disorder reigned there as well. All rooms were cluttered with items. Besides cable ties and rolls of adhesive tape, several handcuffs and hunting knives were found in the house. But most strange, in the attic were several carrier bags filled with human feces. Even if Mark wasn't involved in the woman's disappearance, this finding characterized him as not quite a normal person. Alexandra Morgan's residence in Kent was also searched again. As before, everything looked normal there, no alarming signals. The only thing investigators noticed was a small note left by Alex to one of her sons. The woman invited the boy to go roller skating. Initially, detectives paid no attention to this paper, since there was nothing strange about a mother calling her son for a walk. However, it eventually turned out that this note was a clue that Alex had left for one of her children. She was hinting for him to look for something in the roller skates box. Detectives learned where the boy kept his skates. They found the box under his bed, and besides the skates, there were more than 22,000 pounds in cash hidden in it. Next to it lay another message written by Alex. It stated that this money was intended for her sons in case something happened to her. Most likely, the woman hid the cash in the roller skates box on the day she allegedly headed to the spa center. But why was she afraid that something might happen to her? As now known, Alex was actually heading to Little Bridge Farm. She also indicated the postal code in the note. Did this mean the woman was afraid of Mark Brown? Did it suggest she might not return home after visiting this man's agricultural grounds? Besides money and the note, there was a mobile phone in the box with a PIN code for unlocking written on a piece of paper. Detectives checked the gadget, which Alex probably used to communicate with Mark Brown, and discovered that she used this phone to connect with escort service clients. The messages discussed a filming job for which Alex was promised payment of £100,000 sterling. This sum would have completely changed her life. Before disappearing, Alexandra even made Google searches about what could be purchased with this money, where it could be invested to earn interest. Apparently, Alex agreed to the filming, mentally already planning how to spend the promised amount, but at the same time, her actions clearly showed that she was very nervous and afraid of this offer made by Mark Brown. It's no wonder Alexandra took precautions and left clues in the roller skates box, and her worst fears came true. According to detectives, the woman was dead, and this happened after she arrived at Little Bridge Farm because she didn't leave the farm premises on November 14th, as Mark had claimed. However, on the evening of November 17, 2021, the farm owner was captured by surveillance camera near the scrapyard, which recorded the man heading somewhere in his white work van. And following him was Alex's car, her white Mini Cooper. Now it remained to find out who was driving Alex's car. Police believed that by that time, the woman was no longer alive. Thanks to phone records, detectives managed to establish that it was Mark's associate, a person named Darren Ripley. Based on tower signals, Darren Ripley and Mark Brown were in this area at the same time. Their mobile devices that evening were moving simultaneously at the same speed, as if they were following each other in cars. Police contacted Darren Ripley and asked him to come to the station for questioning. The man, apparently frightened, was quite sincere with officers. He said that he worked with Mark Brown and often helped him repair old cars for resale. On the evening of November 17th, Mark asked Darren to do him a favor by moving a white Mini Cooper from his property. Darren didn't know whose car it was and assumed it was just being repaired at Little Bridge. He agreed, got behind the wheel, and simply followed Mark. Thus, Alexandra Morgan's Mini Cooper was delivered to an area called Home Horse Lane in Hastings, which was just 4 miles from the farm. Mark asked Darren to park the car on the roadside, after which both men left in Mark's van. As soon as police received this information from Darren Ripley, detectives immediately went to Home Horse Lane and, of course, found the missing woman's white Mini Cooper. Alex herself was nowhere to be found. Officers feared they would find a body in the trunk, but it was empty. The car was immediately towed to the police lot. However, experts found no traces of the owner in the car and no particular evidence of her demise. They only had surveillance camera footage where Mark Brown was essentially disposing of Alexandra Morgan's Mini Cooper. But this still didn't prove that he had somehow dealt with the car's owner. Police didn't know what Mark had actually done with Alex, where he had hidden the body. Therefore, the search for her continued. Law enforcement officers searched the agricultural grounds, sheds, and barns. They even drained the small pond on the farm property, looking for any clues. At the same time, other detectives began checking places where Mark Brown worked. And he worked a little bit everywhere. Besides repairing and selling old cars, this person was listed as a general laborer at a construction site, and this information interested investigators. During Alex's disappearance, Mark Brown was working at a construction site near the town of Sevenoaks in Kent. A house was being built on this plot of land, and there was lots of construction waste. Police wondered if the suspect might have tried to dispose of evidence there. In fact, the people who owned the land reported that Mark had asked them if he could throw away an old dishwasher in their container. They allowed him to do so. However, no dishwasher was found in the construction waste bin. Instead, police found an old burned oil drum. Experts pulled out this barrel and found inside burned remains of some items that someone had clearly tried to destroy. Among them was a woman's bag with something like toiletries, such as deodorant and makeup setting spray, as well as a small hairdryer and several hair clips. Fragments of women's jewelry were also lying there. All these items were sent to the forensic laboratory for examination. DNA analysis showed that all these items had previously belonged to the missing Alexandra Morgan. But the most horrifying thing was that among the half-burned items in this barrel, tiny pieces resembling fragments of human bones were discovered. Unfortunately, these findings were so small that specialists couldn't extract DNA from them to determine whose remains they were. Since they were found in an oil drum alongside Alex's belongings, police were certain they belonged to the missing woman. This certainty was confirmed by Alexandra Morgan's dental records, as fragments of teeth were found along with the bone tissue particles. The forensic expert was able to find evidence that these were Alex's teeth. So now police had a pretty clear picture of what happened to the woman after her death. Mark Brown evidently incinerated her body in that oil drum, which he then attempted to conceal in someone else's waste container. If the construction debris had been removed from the site slightly earlier, the perpetrator would have managed to skillfully hide traces of his crime. He undoubtedly knew how to dispose of the dead woman's body in a way that would leave virtually nothing but a couple of teeth and bone fragments. However, he miscalculated by discarding the drum at his workplace. On November 28th, approximately 2 weeks after Alexandra Morgan's disappearance, Mark Brown was charged with taking the life of the 34-year-old woman. Yet this wasn't the end of it. The investigation concerning this individual remained incomplete, as the police soon made another discovery. Perhaps Alex wasn't actually the perpetrator's only victim. In Mark's work vehicle, his white van, detectives found a prescription medication written for Leah Ware. After examining Leah Ware's identity, police discovered that the woman was considered missing. This became known through statements from her close relatives. By November 2021, no one had seen or heard from her for 6 months already. In May 2021, she seemingly just vanished into thin air. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you like this video. It's really important. Leah Ware was a 32-year-old mother of 3 children. Overall, she was an exceptionally caring and nurturing young woman. Those close to her described her as a cheerful and sociable person who consistently tried to see only the good in people. Unfortunately, many took advantage of this trait, and recently Leah had been experiencing significant mental health challenges. She was diagnosed with depression and bipolar personality disorder. The woman underwent treatment and took prescribed medications. Due to her health issues, Leah lost custody of her children. This circumstance also profoundly impacted her emotional state. However, Ware's loved ones were convinced she would never run away voluntarily. Leah had periods when she disappeared from home temporarily due to intensifying symptoms of her condition. Nevertheless, she always returned. Leah's family didn't formally report her disappearance to the police, hoping she would come back on her own. However, when Mark Brown's van revealed her prescription medication, authorities became alarmed and questioned whether something more sinister had happened to her. Could Mark have taken her life just as he did with Alexandra Morgan? Sussex Police Department, which by this point was participating in the investigation alongside Kent Police, contacted Mark Brown while he was in custody for the assault on Alex, and requested him to share what he knew about Leah Ware and her current whereabouts. Brown stated he had no idea where she was now, but admitted he knew Leah and even at one point had been in a relationship with her and looked after her. They allegedly met when Leah began experiencing mental health problems, and the man helped her overcome difficulties. After that, they separated. Detectives didn't believe Mark's story and began digging deeper. The investigation revealed that Mark met Leah in the same way as Alex. Leah performed escort work and was registered on the Adult Work website. It turned out Mark Brown communicated with several different ladies through this site, meeting them and paying for intimate services. Detectives approached the women and asked them to share their impressions of this client. One woman described how once during intercourse, Mark Brown wrapped his hands around her neck and began squeezing so hard that she became genuinely frightened. She tapped his hand, but the man didn't stop or loosen his grip. At that moment, the woman had already bid farewell to life. Fortunately, she later regained consciousness. Examining Mark's electronic devices, such as his computer and mobile phone, police discovered very disturbing information in the search history. According to browser records, Mark was aroused by adult films containing elements of violence. This revealed what a sick and perverted mind this person had, what scenes excited him, and at the core was the idea of complete power and control over women whom he found on the Adult Work website. As previously mentioned, she and Mark met and made contact through the website. Mark sent her a message in March 2018, more than 3 years before her disappearance. From that point on, they began meeting regularly. Over time, this genuinely evolved into something more than just physical intimacy. Despite Mark already having a wife and child, he simply led a double life. Mark even purchased a trailer for his girlfriend Leah to live in occasionally, and placed it at Little Bridge Farm. The woman settled there with her animals. Leah Ware was a great enthusiast of four-legged companions. She adored them. She had 3 goats, a horse, and 2 dogs, an elderly mastiff and a Pomeranian Spitz. Leah stayed in this trailer at Little Bridge Farm until the owners, from whom Mark rented his workshop, discovered this. They disapproved of someone settling on their property without their consent and asked for the trailer to be removed. But instead of selling the mobile home or relocating it somewhere, Mark simply burned it. Leah had nowhere to live, so Mark conceived the idea of housing her in a shipping container on the same farm. The man brought her medications, water, and food. He prohibited her from leaving without his knowledge or bringing friends there. He essentially isolated the woman from everyone, making her a voluntary prisoner in a cell. When his mood deteriorated or problems arose, Mark directed all his anger at Leah. Police had already seen this tiny living space on the farm, which contained an air mattress and something resembling a kitchen. They were surprised that the locks on this makeshift dwelling secured from the outside rather than the inside. Mark deliberately installed fasteners on the external side of Leah's room door, which gave police even more insight into the relationship between these two people. Clearly, the man treated Leah as if she were some kind of animal that could simply be locked in a cage. So now, when detectives were almost certain that Mark Brown had done something to Leah, they began searching Little Bridge Farm anew, looking for evidence pertaining to yet another missing woman. Once again, while combing the surroundings, search teams stumbled upon something resembling bones in the forest encircling the farm. However, these weren't human remains. Analysis determined that the bones belonged to an animal. Police speculated it might have been one of Leah's dogs, her little Pomeranian Spitz. A small pink collar was found nearby, attached to a massive heavy chain with a 12-kilogram weight. Most likely, Mark disposed of the small dog in this manner. He tied an unbearable weight to its collar and left it alone to perish in the forest. Detectives still had no idea what happened to Leah. They didn't know if Mark might have treated his girlfriend similarly, leaving her somewhere abandoned in the woods to be torn apart by wild animals, as he had done with her beloved dog. So they decided to ask Mark directly. But just like before, when discussing Alexandra Morgan, Mark responded to all questions with a single phrase, "No comment." He withdrew into himself and said nothing more to the police. So investigators were left with no choice but to continue searching for evidence and forming their own theories. Police examined Leah Ware's phone records to try to establish an approximate date of her death. Since detectives had little doubt the woman was no longer alive, Leah vanished in May 2021. They determined that her mobile phone was last active on May 8th, and the previous evening, May 7th, the geolocation of Mark's and Leah's phones matched. According to the markers, they were in the same location at Little Bridge Farm until they suddenly disconnected from the network at the same time. This led police to suspect that both Mark and Leah were inside the shipping container. When the door was closed, mobile devices lost signal. Most likely, that night marked the tragic end of Leah Ware's life. It's believed that after the assault, Mark opened the shipping container door, which restored the signal to both phones. But while Mark's mobile remained connected, Leah's signal cut off again, because the door closed, and the phone remained lying next to the lifeless body. This indicated that the woman never left her makeshift cell again. And once the door shut, the signal on her phone disappeared again and never returned. After this, Leah was never seen again. Police determined the time and date of her death as the evening of May 7th, 2021. After Leah's death, Mark continued living his normal life. It was also discovered that after the woman's disappearance, he took her debit card and withdrew all money from her bank account. Mark continued obtaining anxiety and depression medications using prescriptions written in Leah's name to make it appear as though she were alive. But what the man did with Leah and how he disposed of the body after death remained a mystery, at least until detectives took testimony from one specific person from Mark's life. After Leah's disappearance, Mark began communicating on social media with a former classmate named Beth. They attended school together and were very close friends at the time. When schooling ended, as often happens, the friends lost all contact. Detectives discovered from Mark's phone records that in June 2021, he reconnected with Beth and started messaging her online. The former friends reminisced about their fun times in school, shared their accomplishments, and talked about life, attempting to revive their friendship. In her messages, Beth revealed she was going through difficult times. She had recently divorced her husband and was now struggling to handle the situation alone with her children. Mark offered his support, promised to always be there, and even invited her to visit the farm he rented with her children to spend weekends together. Gradually, their relationship transformed from friendship into something more intimate. Police decided to speak with this woman and inquire whether Beth knew anything about Mark's previous lover. Strangely, Beth immediately told officers that Leah was dead, although there was no official confirmation that Leah wasn't alive. She was still listed as missing, and her presumed death hadn't been made public. To further detective questions, Beth stated that Mark had informed her of Leah's death and showed investigators her lover's messages. One of them particularly interested the detectives. The message was sent in June 2021, a month after Leah's disappearance. According to it, Leah's body was disposed of in the same way as Alex Morgan's later would be, burned in an oil drum. In fact, Beth never fully understood the message's meaning. It stated that an old oil drum and 5 liters of diesel fuel had solved all Mark's problems. Mark was essentially confessing to his crime. He wrote that he had committed monstrous acts that now weighed heavily on his heart, head, and soul. The man called himself a psychopath with a conscience, then told his girlfriend it was all a joke. Beth hadn't communicated with Mark for a long time, so she didn't even realize he had confessed to her how he concealed human remains and evidence of the crime. She couldn't comprehend these messages' meaning and assumed Mark was emotional about the breakup and had burned his former lover's possessions. In February 2022, 3 months after Mark Brown was arrested and charged with Alexandra Morgan's murder, he was also charged with taking Leah Ware's life. Although her body wasn't found, police were confident in their collected evidence. Everything indicated that this woman was no longer alive. Presumably, the man intended to make Beth his third victim. He began courting her in the same way he had done with Leah and Alex, initially offering friendship and financial support. If police hadn't stopped this individual, he could have easily become a serial offender. So Beth didn't even realize what tragic fate she had managed to avoid. Mark Brown's trial concluded in late 2022. His attorney attempted to present Alex's death as an accident. Allegedly, the woman slipped on some tools in the workshop and hit her head. His client panicked and, not understanding what he was doing, disposed of the body. And regarding Leah Ware, he claimed that the woman was alive and had gone traveling with some friends. Fortunately, the jury didn't believe him, as the attorney couldn't substantiate his claims. Ultimately, Mark was found guilty of both crimes. It was proven that the tragic deaths of Alexandra Morgan and Leah Ware were the defendant's doing. The man received 2 49-year sentences for each crime to be served concurrently. The sentence reflected the repugnant nature of his crimes and ensured he couldn't harm other women for the rest of his life. Before pronouncing the verdict, the judge offered Mark Brown a chance to reveal the truth about what he did with Leah's body to give her family the opportunity to lay her to rest, and promised to consider this when passing sentence. However, Mark refused to disclose Leah's remains location, and therefore to this day, her body has never been found. Mark Brown didn't appear in court for sentencing, unwilling to hear the victims' families accuse him of murder. He simply wanted to remain in his prison cell. The criminal was too cowardly to face those whose lives he had destroyed. This is the end of the story. Like the video and leave your thoughts in the comments. This was Jeremy. See you soon.